call him a saint. Others say he's crooked, but he sure ain't faint. Got the power in his hands and a smile on his face, but you never really know till you're standing in his place. Some are heroes, some are zeros. Depends on who you ask and where you go. In this world of black and white, they're the stars that shine, but they don't all shine bright. They walk the line between fame and blame. Some folks love them, others curse their name. From Hollywood hills to the dictator's land, they hold the power in the palm of their hand. They rise to the top, but it's a slippery slope. In the hearts of the people, they're a mix of fear and hope. Some are heroes, some are zeros. Depends on who you ask and where you go. In this world of black and white, they're the stars that shine, but they don't all shine bright. They walk the line between fame and blame. Some folks love them, others curse their name. Whoa. Whoa. From our boss living in a big old house, got the longest tail by his words like a vow. To some he's a leader, protecting his kin. To others he's satin with a devilish grin. The question we all must ask ourselves, is this person heaven or this person hell?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of our podcast called Hero or Zero. I am your host, Scotty G, and as always, with me is my co-host, Briggs, the man who loves to dig into history's most controversial characters. So how's it going, Briggs?
Oh, it's going pretty good, Scotty. I'm ready for this one, are you? I'm ready to dig deep into our new character that we have today. When it comes to people who walk the fine line between fame and infamy, I always get excited when we talk about them. I always wonder what really drives them. Was it the greed, or were they just a product of their environment, of where they grew up, the times they went through? You know, everything that it took to survive, all the necessities of life. I have a feeling today's subject is going to be one of those figures who straddled that line like a tightrope walker.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, Briggs. Today's episode, it's packed with history, power, crime, and maybe some community service, but we'll get to that. We're talking about a figure who left a massive imprint on the early 20th century, but we're keeping his identity under wraps for now. So I guess until then, we'll give him his middle name, Gabriel. So we want you, our listeners, to decide by the end of this episode whether Gabriel is a hero or a zero. Did he make his mark in a way that helped people, or did he leave more harm in his wake? What do you think, Briggs? You think at the end he's going to be a hero or a zero?
I believe it all is on perspective. But, you know, the more we do these episodes, or at least looking at the characters we're going to do for these episodes, the more I start to think about the people like Gabriel. You know, they exist in this gray area that most people don't want to go into. He probably didn't, set out and think, am I going to be a hero, or are people going to look at me as a zero or a villain? He likely just did what he had to that was necessary for the time. But I'm intrigued. Tell me, where does our story start with Gabriel? What was his life like before he became the figure we're about to unravel?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that brings us right back to Brooklyn, New York in 1899. That was a long time ago. Gabriel was born to a family of Italian immigrants. His parents, just like so many others at the time, had left the southern part of Italy hoping for a better life in the new world of America. But we have to keep in mind for that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was a pretty challenging time for immigrants. especially in cities like New York, which was crowded, it was dirty, it was dangerous. And for families like Gabriel's, living in tenement housing in a rough neighborhood meant that every day was a struggle. You know, I take a look and think of my time when I was in New York. I mean, everything is cramped, super cramped. So I could only imagine a full-size family stuffed into an area probably the size of my living room and maybe dining room put together. You know, I'm in my house with three of us, and it's plenty of room. But for, you know, this whole family being in a spot a quarter of my house, that would be rough. But I guess it is what it is back then, and I should be thankful I'm at where I'm at, right? But so let's get back to it. His father, he was a barber. He scraped together just enough to keep food on the table for his wife and the 9 kids. Woof. I thought it was rough growing up with, you know, there was 7 of us in the house. So I guess I can't complain. Anyway, Gabriel, he grew up surrounded by hardship. And growing up, education wasn't exactly at the top priority for kids like him. It was survival. And by the time he was 14, Gabriel dropped out of school. He turned to the streets, and kind of in a way, it became his real classroom. It's, you know, he's probably like you and I. We really don't learn things reading out of the book. You learn things being hands-on. You know, he might have been learning things in a different manner that you and I probably wouldn't learn of. But, you know, the streets was his classroom.
Yeah, and when we look back where we grew up, it was a nice, safe place here, living where we live. It wasn't like the streets in California, New York, all those places that it's really makes or breaks you. And it's interesting, so many stories of the major historical figures, you know, when you start to notice that a lot of them, they grew up around crime. And it was in their background. They saw the poverty and all the immigrant families that they were around and the rough neighborhoods. It kind of shaped them to the person that they were going to end up to be by the choices that they were being made. I mean, let's face it, you know, in Brooklyn at the turn of the century, it was a really bad place to be if you didn't have a place to go, like school and stuff. But you wouldn't learn what you need to learn to make money, and being on the streets, you know, it's backbreaking work just for pennies back in the day. And Gabriel, you know, he only had an option if not going to school. It was being around, you know, seeing the older, tougher kids running the streets, making money, gaining respect. It almost wasn't like a choice for him. It was just there, and he had to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly, Briggs. Gabriel, he saw that straight and narrow wasn't going to get him anywhere. The streets were tough, and he had to be tougher. By the time he was in his teens, Gabriel got involved with one of the most notorious gangs in New York. It was known as the 5 Points Gang. This wasn't just a group of street thugs. They were an organized criminal network. They were deeply entrenched in gambling, protection rackets, and extortion. And Gabriel, that's where he survived. And I'm thinking, holy cow, at 14, I was more excited about Halo 2. I think that's when Halo 2 came out, somewhere in that ballpark. And there he is on the street doing all kinds of thug stuff, or I guess mob stuff, whatever you want to call it. But I don't know, maybe he was just smarter than I was. People noticed him quickly. He wasn't just another one of those faces in the crowd. He had charisma, leadership skills, and a reputation for knowing how to get it done. But what really made him dangerous was that he could blend charm and violence. When it came time to talk, he could win people over. And when it came time to act, he didn't hesitate to get his hands dirty.
You know, the duality of it's fascinating between charm and brutality. It's a theme we've seen before in history, you know. People who can do both the ruthless and the likable act. They tend to climb the ranks fast because they understand both sides of power. But I'm guessing, Scotty, you know, New York was just the starting point for Gabriel. His ambitions, they must have taken him somewhere else.
Yeah, and that right there, you're absolutely right, Briggs. Gabriel's real opportunity came in the early 1920s when he made the move out to Chicago. This was a city that was about to become the center of a massive underground economy. And that's all thanks to one thing that happened in the 1920s. Briggs, what do you think that was?
Prohibition.
Oh yeah, let's get into that. So Prohibition, which started in 1920, that banned the sale, production, and the transportation of alcohol. The government's goal was to curb crime, improve public morals, and reduce alcohol consumption. But instead, it kind of did the opposite. People didn't stop drinking, they just found illegal ways to get booze. Criminals like Gabriel saw that was an incredible business opportunity.
You know, it's hilarious that prohibition might have been one of the greatest unintended economic experiments of all time. You make something illegal, the people want it, and all of a sudden the market for the product just explodes. It's almost like the law itself created the underworld economy, and Gabriel, he was just one of the guys to take advantage of that. You think?
Yeah, pretty much. It's just like anything in the real world economy. What the people want, and if you have what they want, you are going to get rich.
Oh yeah.
I mean, look back during COVID time. You know, if you had toilet paper, you were freaking Donald Trump himself. You know, Game of Thrones. But, you know, if you were in need of that stuff, you were paying up the yin yang just to get it. I mean, I work in the grocery industry, and many of the stores that were 24 hours went to, you know, say like 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. And every day, right as they unlocked those doors to open the store, people would run like it's Black Friday to get the cheapest TV. They were running down to the toilet paper aisle to grab any and every toilet paper item there was. This pack of toilet paper that was usually $12, it was $22.99. People bought it like it didn't even matter. So, I mean, on that, you hit the nail right on the head. Because when Gabriel arrived in Chicago, he wasted no time getting involved in the bootlegging. He linked up with this guy named Johnny, who was a local crime boss. He had a pretty decent operation going, but Gabriel wasn't content to be second in command. He wanted to go for it all. So within just a couple years, Gabriel had taken over Johnny's operations, and he turned it into a humongous empire. So this wasn't just small-time bootlegging operation. Gabriel controlled the speakeasies, smuggling routes, breweries, and more. And his network wasn't just local, it was huge, spanned all across the Midwest and even reached into Canada, where they smuggled liquor across the border. And here's where Gabriel was smart. He didn't just rely on brute force. This is where he got a little happy with the local authorities. He paid off police, judges, politicians, all of them just to protect his empire. You know, his corruption ran so deep in Chicago at his peak, it was practically impossible to touch him.
You know what is one of the most interesting things to me about Gabriel? He didn't just build a criminal operation. He essentially created a parallel economy. I mean, he controlled so much of what was happening in Chicago that you could argue he was the city's economy at the time, right? And here's the thing, he didn't just stop with alcohol. From what I've read, he's expanded into gambling, prostitution, and extortion. A lot of those crimes that he was committing at the time, he didn't see it as, you know, him just doing another crime. It was more money that he could make. Like every other business people like to do, you know. But he was figuring out really early on on that crime was just another form of business if you were willing to bend or break the rules.
So kind of in a way, he was doing what all the big mega companies here in the United States like to do. You know, for example, Amazon. Hey, let's start with selling books. Now let's move on to this. Now let's do internet services, or I guess like web hosting, and then let's buy out like Ring doorbells and do that, and let's get in the music and let's get in entertainment. He didn't want to just do alcohol. Like, hey, let's put my hand in everywhere and everywhere I can to make more money. Does that sound about right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So to him, it was all about running a successful business, except all of his businesses were illegal. They were violent, and they were all corrupt. But he didn't see it that way. He just saw opportunities and seized them. When rival gangs threatened his control, Gabriel wasn't afraid to fight. And that's where things really took a turn for the bloody. By the late 1920s, Chicago had become a battleground for control over the illegal alcohol trade. Gabriel's biggest rival was Bugs. Yeah, Bugs was a gangster. He controlled the north side. And the rivalry between Gabriel and Bugs escalated into all-out gang warfare. Bombs, shootings, assassinations. It was all kind of a part of the game. And like, sadly, if you take into like the shootings and whatnot, it's kind of like modern day Chicago. You know, an average, 20 people die each weekend just in shootings? Or don't quote me on that. I don't know the exact statistic, but anyway.
Yeah, the crime rate in Chicago nowadays, it's pretty crazy. But I couldn't imagine seeing it at its height back in the 1920s, you know. The casualties, you know, they weren't just limited to the criminal world. These gang wars, they didn't exactly have neat boundaries. Innocent people sometimes got caught in the crossfires, and the violence spilled over into the streets, you know. I can only imagine how terrifying it was to the average person living in Chicago at the time, just trying to go to their job, to the grocery store, and seeing a fight between criminal gangs happen right there on the streets. It'd be crazy.
Right. Well, and what's crazy to think about too, I don't quote me on the exact date, but this is it's kind of in the ballpark of when the what was it, Black Tuesday happened, when the Great Depression started. You know, because I'm sure this stuff happened before and after Black Tuesday. So think all these people that are seeing these crimes happen in the streets while they're standing there in the soup bread lines, just trying to get food, and they see the stuff going on all around them. You know, it could be like a lot of these cities we see now where you see all these needles and druggies just, you know, wasting away there on the sidewalk. You know, I know it's not the same, but, you know, one addiction versus the other.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Just a little ramble on my part. But let's get back to it. The violence, it wasn't limited just the gangs themselves. Innocent people got caught in the crossfire. And it was during this period that one of the most infamous events in American crime history happened. You know what it is, Briggs?
I don't know what it is. What is it?
It's called the Valentine's Day Massacre.
Oh, man. This is one of the moments in history where the line between myth and reality, it just gets blurred, you know? We've all heard about the massacre, but how did it actually go down?
You really want to know?
I do.
Are you sure?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, February 14th, 1929, Valentine's Day. This was no romantic holiday for Gabriel's rivals. I mean, I guess he could show up with some roses and chocolates, but yeah, no, he wasn't into that. His men, they dressed as police officers, tricked 7 members of Bug's gang into thinking they were about to get arrested. They were lined up against a wall in a garage, and instead of getting arrested, they were gunned down. Cold, calculated, and brutal. This event shocked the nation. The massacre was front page news across the country, and it cemented Gabriel's control over Chicago. While he was never directly tied to the massacre, no one could prove he gave the order, but everyone knew he was behind it.
It's wild to think about the scale of his operation. This wasn't just a bar fight or just some street level hit. This was planned out, organized, and executed with precision. Oh,
You thinking that?
Oh.
Executed?
Yeah,
Yeah.
with precision. And even though Gabriel didn't pull the trigger himself, it's clear he orchestrated the whole thing. The public must have been horrified. But I mean, he's a legend. I don't think he's gonna go against what the public knows, but I don't think he's gonna incriminate himself saying it.
Yeah, which is true. Did you ever watch that show Breaking Bad?
Always.
Yeah, yeah. So it makes me think of there with Walter White, because he did that kind of stuff too. You know, he had people inside the prisons. He needed people taken out. So it's who you know.
Yep.
So he got it done, just as Gabriel did. So his reputation as both a ruthless crime boss and a larger than life figure only grew after the massacre. But here's where things get complicated, Briggs. You ready for it?
Always.
All right. So, despite all the violence, Gabriel had another side to him that people respected. They even admired him. So, during the Great Depression, he opened up soup kitchens, donated money to local charities, and often helped struggling families. To many people in Chicago, especially in his own community, Gabriel was seen as a protector, a man who looked out for his own when no one else would. Yeah, so with Gabriel helping out with those soup kitchens, it brought a lot of employment to the area. Because you got to think with the soup kitchens, it takes food, it takes logistics to get the food there, people to prep it, to make it, to clean it up, so on and so forth. So God only knows how many people he directly employed. Then, I want to say it was Thanksgiving of 29. Reports said over 5,000 people were fed that day alone just by his soup kitchen. I mean, that's a lot of work to do. And like, they don't have microwaves like we do now. You got to do the work. So there's that. And then there's also rumor, don't quote me on this, I haven't found any information to prove or deny it, but apparently Gabriel provided milk to the school children. And there were times he got milk deliveries that were bad. And rumor is he helped establish Best By dates on packages. Somehow he convinced the Chicago City Council to get those listed. Once again, I can't prove whether that's true or not. Just speculation. But it makes you wonder, because that right there is something else.
It's a fascinating contrast. In one hand, you've got a guy who's orchestrated massacres and running a criminal empire. But on the other hand, he's feeding thousands of hungry people who need help and who are down on their luck. It's almost like he's two completely different people, depending on which side of the line you're standing on. And that's the thing about people like Gabriel. They aren't simply just a zero or a villain, depending on how you see him, or a hero. They're complex. They're layered individuals. I mean, you can't deny that he helped a lot of people. But does that erase the fact that he built an empire through violence and corruption? I don't know, man.
Yeah, so it's kind of like looking at him if he was an onion. You know, maybe the core of the onion was, big-hearted, but all the outer layers was all his shells that was all evil and villainous.
Yeah.
Best way I can think to describe it. But, I mean, that's just the big question, isn't it? I mean, Gabriel's life is full of contradictions, and it's what makes him hard to categorize. To some, he was a hero. He was a man who stood up to the authority, provided for the poor, and took care of his community. And to others, he was nothing more than just a violent gangster who caused untold suffering. And that's what brings up another question, too. Look at Prohibition. You couldn't have alcohol. But look at our society nowadays. How many people use alcohol as a medication? Now, I'm not saying, being a full-blown alcoholic is a good thing. It's definitely not. But how many people have a rough day, they get home and they have a nice cold beer with dinner and it helps them relax? Some people, alcohol is their new, what would be a prescription, like Xanax or something?
Yeah.
How many people have to take a shot of whiskey to help them, fall asleep at night? And to think back then, during the Great Depression, how many people were living out on the streets? I'm sure hearing all the noises and the concerns that someone's going to come mug you in the middle of the night. If you could have that shot of whiskey to help yourself fall asleep, I'm sure it would help. So I'm sure to some people, he was pretty well a hero. But no matter how big of a hero this powerful Gabriel was, his reign wasn't going to last forever. You know, he was doing things illegally. But this is where things take a twist, where no one saw it coming. He was like a deer in the headlights. Gabriel was brought down not by a rival gangster or law enforcement. He was brought down something far less dramatic. Do you know what that was, Briggs?
I don't. What is that?
It's Uncle Sam. Tax evasion.
Tax evasion? You mean after all the violence, all the illegal booze, and all the corruption, they get him on fucking fines?
Taxes. Uncle Sam is mad. He wants his taxes. So, for all his criminal genius, Gabriel made one fatal mistake. He didn't pay his taxes. So the government couldn't pin him on murder, bootlegging, other crime that he did. All they could prove that he hadn't done was paying taxes on his illegal income. So, 1931, Gabriel was convicted of tax evasion, sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. And not just any prison, Riggs. You know what the most famous prison there is?
In the world? Or in the United States?
Probably just the United States.
It has to go with Alcatraz.
Ding, 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 ding. It was Alcatraz. That's where he was sent.
Alcatraz, now that's a big league place to go when it comes to being punished. That place was notorious. I mean, they didn't have a lot of people tried to escape. A lot of people died trying to escape from that place. They don't just send anyone there, you know, unless you did something really, really bad.
They basically wanted you to go there and make sure that you weren't coming back anytime soon, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, looking at Alcatraz, it was designed to break men. And Gabriel, he was no exception. By the time he got there, his health had already started to decline. He had been suffering from syphilis for years, and the disease was affecting both his mental and his physical health. But prison life was hard on him. By the time he was released early for good behavior in 1939, he was pretty well a broken man. So he said goodbye to Alcatraz and he headed down to Florida. It's where he spent his final years at. He lived quietly with his family. In 1947, at the age of 48, Gabriel died from complications related to syphilis, where it was tragic and almost anticlimactic, and for the man who had been at one time one of the most powerful figures in the country.
It's incredible to think how far he fell. From ruling Chicago's underworld to dying quietly in Florida. Almost forgotten, but Scotty, this whole story leaves us with some pretty big questions. Was Gabriel... Do you know who Gabriel is?
I think I got a pretty good idea, but I'm not going to spill it. Do you want to spill who it is?
Our hero or zero today is Al Capone. Was he a hero? Was he a zero? You know, through everything that we have shown you guys today and talked about, what do you guys think? Was he a man who did what he had to do to survive and help his community? Or was he someone who caused more harm than good in that long life of his?
Yeah, I'd say more of a short life, but, you know, I'm sure things about it was long. But that's the question that we leave to you, our listener. Was Al Capone a hero for his community or a zero for his violence and the corruption he brought into the world? It's complicated, and I don't think that there's a clear answer. But I'll just say this. Al Capone's life is a testament to the fact that history is rarely just black and white, and it's all about perspective. And that's our goal for this show, Hero or Zero. You know, where we have laid out all the facts. Now it's up for you to decide. Was Al Capone a hero or zero? Let us know what you think by joining the conversation on social media or leaving a comment.
We eventually want to get a weekly poll going so that you, as our listeners, can vote on who you think is a hero or zero. Then in future podcasts, we can share the results of our listeners, of who our listeners think they are as a hero or a zero. I'm Briggs, signing off, reminding you that history is never simple. It's always layered and full of contradictions.
Yeah, well said, Briggs. I'm Scotty G. We'll catch you on next time on Hero Zero. Until then, keep questioning, keep debating, and keep searching for the truth on who deserves to be called a hero.